Liz, you can put us on.
We're live.
Okay, well, thank you everyone for joining us this morning, and we've got a few items to discuss this morning. We're going to, AOT will be here sometime this morning to talk about Woodstock. We would like to get that issue moving, and I know yesterday there was some requests to have what they might do for safety, because I think it's something we want to put in line with everyone else and in fairness to all other communities in Vermont. So with that, Liz, what is our first item on the agenda this morning is?
Governor's EV funding package with Riley Allen and Michelle Boomhauer.
Okay, who wants to take it away? Michelle or Riley?
Sure, Senator Mazza, I'll kick it off and then we can move on to Riley to talk about some of the technical details on his end of the spectrum. So I'm Michelle Boomhauer, the Division Director for Policy Planning and Intermodal Development, which includes rail, aviation, and public transit. And I'm going to talk to you this morning about the governor's recommend relative to electric vehicle advancement in the state of Vermont. As we all know, we have challenges in the transportation sector related to greenhouse gas emissions, where 44% of our carbon emissions in the state are attributed to transportation because we have such a green electric infrastructure. We've made advances in other sectors, but transportation really is a focal point right now. Additionally, conversion to electric vehicles is an equity issue and an economic issue for Vermonters. On average, driving an electric vehicle is equivalent to paying about $1.50 a gallon for gas. And the rates are much more stable with electricity than with gas rates. So we are interested in continuing our advancement that we've laid the groundwork for in prior years. So this year we have a package of incentives. I've provided you the white paper in your testimony documents today. And I'm just going to walk through these. You're going to see this in-depth detail when the transportation bill comes over, but I want to give you a preview and see if there's anything we should be paying attention to when we're getting ready to bring this to you for final consideration once you have the T-bill. So under electric vehicle incentives, we have the EV incentive program, which we started a couple of years ago. And the legislature has allocated just over $2 million for EV incentives in the 2 years of that program. Those incentives have been well taken advantage of, and all that remain right now, and we established the second round of incentives just this past November with about 950,000, and the first round had already been used up. And right now there's about 535,000 in funds remaining available for incentives, and so those continue to move. Those incentives are set up in an income sensitized eligibility framework.
Frank is on
with
hold for you.
the highest incentive you can get is $4,000. So that's been very popular. The next item is going to be the kind of an expansion and a complementary program. Going back to the EV incentives, we're proposing $2 million more in incentives for that program. The next program is called Replace Your Ride.
Michelle?
Yes.
I'm sorry. You said 2 million more for that program. Are you talking about as it's currently defined in terms of qualifications or the eligibility parameters?
Yeah, we are not considering different parameters for that. We've found that, and I'll talk in more detail when we come in with the T-bill, but about half of the incentives in that program that we've issued have gone to folks in the lower tier income brackets, and about half to folks in the upper tier income brackets that are available in the program. So we're feeling that, it's serving a variety of Vermonters. It's very popular, and the money's moving. So we want to actually increase it a bit, going up to 2 million for this coming fiscal year, and keep that going forward.
One of the problems that I have, or one of the issues that I talked to a dealer the other day, and they said a $40,000 electric vehicle or hybrid can get it's down to 28,000, and then even less than that. So there's some great incentives.
Yeah.
But my concern is we're still not addressing the gas tax. And how are we going to continue to have incentives? And you'll probably have that discussion later on, but it's got to happen, because I'm not going to support more incentives, and yet we're losing every day. And I want to see electric vehicles, but on the other hand, we're still not addressing the fact that every time we sell electric vehicle or hybrid, we're losing gas tax, if we're going to have our source of income based on gas tax. Simple as that.
Yeah. Yeah, Senator Mazza, you certainly have made this point historically, and we have heard you on this. Joe Segali is going to be coming in next week, I believe. I've been working with Liz to try and get him scheduled to talk about an operational analysis that we're doing to try and figure out how we would begin to charge people based on miles driven. Right. Starting with folks who have electric vehicles. And so we're going to be working with a broad stakeholder list, because we need to figure out how this is going to work for consumers, how it's going to work for the DMV, et cetera. And so I think we've got a pretty good plan laid out, so that next session we could potentially bring you some legislation that would implement that type of program.
Are we considering at the charging station collection there? Is that one of the considerations?
Yeah, that would be one of the considerations, because what we know is that about 26 to 28% of our gas tax revenue comes from people traveling to and through Vermont.
Right.
So it's not like you can just, increase the registration fee. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. All right. Jane, you got
something? Yeah, in the past, and when we've had the reports on EVs, there's always been this balance between creating incentives and the disincentives that come with pay your share of the transportation infrastructure. And the threshold of 15% has been used fairly routinely. Can you tell me where we now stand in terms of that 15% threshold?
Yeah. Right now, electric vehicles comprise about 1% of the entire fleet. And we have about 4,000 registered electric vehicles right now. But what I will tell you is, in terms of new sales, electric vehicles comprise 7% of new sales now. So they're gaining in popularity. You've seen the announcements by GM that they're going to go all electric by 2035. And so I think we're starting to, get on that curve. And that's why we want to get this mechanism in place, as Senator Mazza mentions, to collect a road user fee from those users.
Okay.
Okay, go right ahead.
All right. So in addition to the incentives, both through the new plug-in electric vehicle incentive program that I just spoke about, as well as the Mileage Smart program that's being administered by Capstone for very low-income people, we want to introduce a new program which is called Replace Your Ride. And this program is designed so that a $3,000 incentive would be available for folks that turn in a 2010-year-old vehicle or older that has been registered and inspected regularly by the person here in Vermont, so not just what you find in your backyard maybe. By turning in that older high emissions vehicle, they would receive $3,000 that they could put on top of an incentive they would receive through the new PEV program or the Replace Your Ride program. And this is really targeted toward lower income people. We'd be looking at folks who have a $50,000 per year adjusted gross income or lower. And, really one of the big issues for lower income people is the initial investment in the vehicle. So this is going to put them in a new vehicle. And this is a complex program. We'll have a lot to bring you in terms of information about it. But this is a program that's been operating in California really successfully. And so we're looking to replicate it in Vermont. And in addition, for somebody who wants to turn in their older emitting vehicle and decide not to get another vehicle because maybe they live on a bus route or they want to get an electric motorcycle or an electric bicycle combined with using public transit, there would be lower levels of incentives to incentivize those folks to change their transportation options. So we're suggesting that we establish this program and provide incentives, and we're looking for $1.5 million to do that.
And who would administer that program?
Well, we don't have an identified party to administer that program. And in fact, I think we are going to be looking at how we administer all three of these electric vehicle incentive programs. Right now, we have the distribution utilities acting as the fiscal agent to get incentives out to dealerships. We have Drive Electric Vermont, who is really sort of a program outreach and coordination and technical assistance arm. We have Capstone, whose mission isn't necessarily running incentive programs. It's really educating and helping lower income Vermonters find efficient transportation. And if we add this new program, we're thinking perhaps we need to look at a model where we have a single administrator for all three of these programs, and that we, find a way to make sure they're complementary, that everybody's on the same page. And so that's, I think, part of the challenge we need to address right now.
Okay, questions?
All right.
Okay.
So the next program is actually the continued education and outreach in our partnership with Drive Electric Vermont for technical assistance, promotional efforts, and supporting the expansion of the EV market. And as we know, Drive Electric Vermont has been a trusted and valued partner since the inception of our work in advancing electric vehicles. They serve as a conduit for information to auto dealerships, to consumers, to folks that want to install EV charging stations. They really are the expert here. And the public-private partnership we've had with Drive Electric Vermont has really aided agency staff, not at just transportation, but at public service, at ANR, in being able to create effective programming and deliver it. So we're looking for $250,000 to expand the activities we're doing with Drive Electric Vermont in that process.
Michelle, we one of our goals, I know, has been that have a charging station within 30 miles, I think it is.
Yep.
How fast are we? Because I see, unless we have charging stations, I don't see a big rush on electric vehicles. How many have we put out there in the last year? Is there 50 out there, or 10 or 5 or?
I have to apologize, Senator. I don't know the exact number.
Okay.
What I can tell you is the contract for finishing the goal of establishing a fast charger within 30 miles of every Vermonter was issued this week. And we expect to have those installations complete, hopefully by the end of this year. We've had some trouble getting equipment during the pandemic in some cases, but we'll have established that goal. We have the $750,000 that will be going out to bid, and that was money from the capital bill last year. So we'll be putting that out to bid to do more corridor charging. And then we also will be, and I'll get to this in a moment, but we're going to be proposing to invest in more charging stations for the coming year. I think the other thing to keep in mind is we're going to be seeing a federal infrastructure bill. Probably they're sort of telegraphing that it may be as soon as the end of May. And that bill is going to really have heavy targets towards addressing transportation impacts relative to climate. And the Biden administration is going to be looking to states to really advance electric charging station deployment. I expect we'll see money in that bill for us to potentially do some electric charging station deployment along roadway networks. And the Department of Energy is also likely to have monies for charging station deployments for workstations and multifamily housing units. So I think we'll see a big uptick in charging station deployment. It's a really, it's one of those things where people are concerned about buying an electric vehicle and, whether they can get it charged if they're out and about. But then also folks that are installing these aren't making money quite yet. So, that's where our incentives come in.
So will it be installed at like rest areas or be installed at private businesses or how does that work?
So probably not rest areas because we can't sell things on the interstate,
Right.
as we've heard before. However, we expect they will be installed at private businesses or at public property locations if it's adjacent to traveled corridors. So, sometimes we might have a fast charging station installed at a park and ride if it's located to other amenities, because it takes about 20 minutes to get a fast charge. So we're doing one in Springfield, I believe, or no, Wilmington, with our upcoming grant round. And that one is, adjacent to an area where there's other things for people to do, walk over and get a coffee, that sort of thing.
Positive.
Okay, go ahead, Senator Chittenden.
I hope I didn't jump the line, Senator Perch. Like real quick, Mrs. Boomhauer, Michelle, I heard you say, and I completely understand how we can't sell things on the interstate. It's entirely federally funded. I would just say with Joe Biden's priorities and what he said, and with the new leadership down in DC, is there any reconsiderations you think at the federal level to encourage more electric vehicles and possibly lightening the restrictions on federally funded highways like Interstate 89 so that we could have electric charge cars be able to charge up at these rest stops, which seems to make sense for a variety of reasons?
I have not heard of anything moving in that direction. And honestly, I don't really think, obviously service plazas where they exist are very convenient. But I think the other consideration is I think Vermont would prefer to have people get off the interstate for a minute and spend some money on something that we're selling. And so, there's, we want to make sure people are aware that charging stations exist near to the interstate. And we want to encourage folks to take advantage of that amenity, but also take advantage of, spending some money in Vermont when they're charging. So, I really don't think we're going to see a movement in terms of that direction.
Do you think the power companies are interested in doing it, like the Green Mountain Power? And you think they're interested in getting into that and supplying them, seeing they're going to be the broker for some of the monies from both ends, give to us ourselves?
Yeah, they've been very supportive in advancing charging station deployment. They have a lot of incentive programs, both for consumers who want to get a home charger when they make a purchase of an EV. Yeah, and then they also are working on projects with small businesses to deploy charging stations at their locations for their customers. And also they've partnered with some of our bigger applicants for the EV charging station deployments in terms of, helping with the make ready and that sort of thing. So they are a big partner and a big player in terms of the utilities role.
All right, thank you. Okay. Yes, Senator Pertwee.
Thank you. Michelle, two questions, I think, or maybe three. One is I would encourage, now that we're going to meet the 30-mile as the crow flies, that we switch to a goal for as the car drives, but we have a goal something like every 50 miles on the main travel corridors, we have a fast charger. I see that as the next logical kind of goal to set. So I'd like to do that. Also, I just thought for the committee that we schedule Dave Roberts from Drive Electric to come in. I know he's provided good testimony in the past. He provided that nice chart we used to have up on the bulletin board of all electric cars and how much they cost and what their miles that we would refer to. So I think as we look at the incentive program, it's good to have Dave Roberts' testimony on what the marketplace is, what's available, which kind of goes to my other question is AOT thinking of keeping the MSRP limit for the EV incentive of $40,000?
Yes.
I got a letter on that. In fact, the former employee of AOT was concerned about the $40,000. They wanted higher because they wanted some incentives over 40,000. But I don't know where you draw the line, but I would say 40,000. Like this dealer told me last week that you can get down in the low 20s now with a $40,000 vehicle. That's a lot of incentives. I mean, that's big time. And so, like I said, my only concern is that we get a piece of the action in the
Well,
future.
there were two. One is we should raise the 40,000. We should also raise the income eligibility so more Vermonters could qualify for the incentive. But I have to say, when you're talking, I don't mean to minimize the recommendations, but 2 million in the scheme of things does require some limitations to direct it in the to where it's needed the most. And and that's been one of the concerns is historically so many of the incentives that have been out there on the federal level particularly have been really are just not don't make sense, or that they really don't, they aren't available for someone with more limited means. So it would be nice if we could say, sure, an incentive for everybody. It's sort of like, we all shall have prizes, so to speak, and all shall win, which is out of a book. So I don't see how we can do it. Not for the 1.5 for your new program and the 2 million for EVs. That's just
Also,
too modest.
Also, Michelle mentioned that it's equivalent to $1.50 a gallon for gasoline. So that's a big incentive right there. I mean, I know when you buy the car, it's different than when you're maintaining it, but that's still a big deal on the savings on gasoline. So anyway, yes, Senator Pertwee, you got a question?
That one issue that makes it difficult with the incentives is that some vehicles still get the federal tax credit up to $7,500. So that's a big number, but the most popular ones don't because they've reached the limit. So Tesla can't offer the 7,500. GM on the Bolt can't offer the 7,500. So the incentive difference is very great between the different vehicles. So I don't know if it'd be too complicated to try to take that into account when developing the program, but I think it might be helpful if there is a way to do that.
Yeah,
In what way, Andy, are you talking about for those where the federal incentive is not available, that the state incentive would be higher?
Yeah, that would be basically the idea.
I think one thing to consider in that regard is the federal tax credits require that you have a tax liability.
That's
And
true.
so that in itself sort of speaks to the fact that lower income folks may not even be qualified for those tax credits. And there's actually, I went to, and I'll put the link in the chat for folks, but I was at the federal site yesterday, and there are a lot of models that qualify for a tax credit right now. So I don't know that changing our framework to make sure people can get a Bolt or a Tesla is going to serve maybe the population we're trying to target.
Well, I'm just suggesting you think about it, because as the other manufacturers reach the limit, they won't have it either. And if you lease the car, then they'll take the tax credit, and it helps to lower the lease
You're
payment.
right.
There are ways for those that don't have the tax liability to take advantage of it.
That is true. That is true. I'd kind of forgotten about that. It's been a while since I thought that one all the way through, but that's a good point. We're also hearing that it's likely that, perhaps the framework of the tax credit structure might be changed within the framework of policies the Biden administration is considering. So there could be that as well.
Okay,
Okay. So moving on. So the next one I'm going to talk about is a sales, an incentive to sell vehicles for dealers and sales force. And not only an incentive, but education and training for fleet managers. There's a very uneven distribution of knowledge and interest among dealers across the state in advancing electric vehicles. And we have, a couple, Alderman Chevrolet in the Rutland area and Nissan in the South Burlington area, who are really, pushing. I think the Ford dealer in Hardwick also was a real early adopter and really moved it. But, then we have folks who want to buy an electric vehicle, and they'll walk into their dealership, and A, they may not have any on the lot. B, they may not have anybody that knows anything about them. And I know this is going to change. We hear that the industry is doing more in terms of educating and providing information for dealerships, but we feel if we are going to really make this synergy of different activities, from charging stations to availability to consumer interest work, we're going to have to boost in this area. And so we're proposing $250,000 for training and incentives, with up to $150,000 being available to set up training programs and administer training for salespersons and dealerships. And that could include their mechanic workforce as well. Just trying to understand and get everybody acclimated, and also to help these dealerships understand how the variety of incentives work together. How do you send a person home with the connections to how they get a charging station installed at their house, the incentives the utilities are offering, sort of the whole package, so that the consumer gets the best service they can get in terms of walking home or driving home their EV, I should say. I will also let you know that on this area, last year, the legislature passed Act 151, which was targeted towards expanding the role of Efficiency Vermont in delivering energy efficiency services and incentives and assistance. And that would be into the transportation sector as well. And so not only Efficiency Vermont, but Burlington Electric, who's the Vermont's other efficiency utility, have either Burlington's already filed their Public Utility Commission request for implementing transportation efficiency measures. And Efficiency Vermont will be filing shortly if they haven't already. I think it was going to be this week. And they are also proposing to work with manufacturers, with dealerships, and with customers to make sure that there is availability from the supply side for an adequate understanding of the supply side by dealerships to move this. So I'm hoping that we can get them to come in, talk about their program. We would dovetail our proposal to coordinate with their program. But I think this is a really important transition that the Transportation Committee will want to hear about.
Okay.
All right. The next one I mentioned earlier, the EV charging infrastructure. We're proposing $1 million request for EV charging infrastructure. And in this case, we are suggesting to target multifamily dwelling locations versus something on the highway network. We know that it's, I wouldn't say easy, but it's accessible for somebody who owns their own home to get a charging station. There's incentives through the utilities for homeowners to do this, but folks that rent or folks that don't control the availability of this type of infrastructure in maybe a condo or mixed income development where they live are not likely to be able to get charging at home. And home charging is where you're going to do 80% of your charging once you own a vehicle. And so we want to be able to start to move level 2 charging into these locations. It would probably be something along the lines of you have 10 units or more of housing. We would be looking towards more populated infill areas in village centers and downtowns where the charging stations could, not only be available to the residents where they would be probably charging mostly at night, but also folks that are in the area and you might be able to walk, 5 minutes from the charging station to other activities in your downtown or village center and have your car charging for 3 or 4 hours during the day while you're doing some other errands or activities. So that's what we're looking at for that type of.
How does that work though? If a charging station takes how's long? 10 minutes, 20 minutes? I mean, would that car be tied up, that whole charging station, for if they leave it there and don't take it off and somebody else can't get on?
So in this case, Senator Mazza, what it would probably be is level 2 charging, which is the one that takes about 4 hours. And the what you do in that case is you have holdover charges. So if somebody like leaves their car on past 4 hours and they're all charged up, then the amount they are charged for staying there with their car plugged in and not charging anymore, it becomes, kind of cost prohibitive for them to want to do that. And, because it's all done, via electronic, technology, it's easy to sort of set the meter and know.
So if you had a complex with 100 apartments or so, only 3 or 4 cars would get to charge in a day though. I mean, you only have one, there's only one plug-in at a charging station?
No, you can set up a bank of chargers. And so it would probably be like, they're probably, depending on how large the facility is,
Okay.
you might set up a bank of charging stations that have 4 to 8, if you're going to bother putting the infrastructure in, if things are going in this direction, you want to be able to expand it as time goes on. But yeah, it'd be bigger than just one.
And you're saying some of these take 4 hours to charge?
The level 2 is the medium duration charging.
Wow.
And that's really what you would use for home charging. And it's not for the quick, fast charge that you're on the road traveling. It's, if you're going shopping, you're, going to the library, you're going to a class, that sort of thing.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. All right. Now I'm going to turn it over to Riley for a couple of items about EV rate design and demand charges.
Okay.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning. Yeah, so for the record, I'm Riley Allen, Deputy Commissioner at the Vermont Department of Public Service. And I want to talk a few minutes with you about electric vehicle charging, EV rates, and demand charges. I'll explain what those are and what I mean by those, and why we think this is an important element of the bill. But very broadly, electric vehicles, it's exciting from the standpoint of the environmental opportunities and potentially lowering the costs of transportation, but it also has significant implications for the electric grid. If we move forward with electric vehicles without considering charging patterns and the ability to manage loads, ultimately we would begin to bump up against the limits of our grid. Not so much on the generation side. I'm not actually that anxious about that. It's more the wires side of the business. So the bulk transmission system can ultimately be implicated, and the local distribution system, to the extent that there are going to be circuits and neighborhoods that are experiencing more load growth in the early going. But on the upside, electric vehicles are just an extremely kind of flexible load. It's not like an oven and other appliances in the house. A typical household only drives the electric vehicle for 2 hours or less out of a 24-hour period. That means that for 22 out of the 24 hours of the day, there's a lot of flexibility in the recharging, especially if you rely on like a level 2 charger, which is, I think of it as between kind of an hour and a half and 3 hours of charging. But if you were to actually kind of draw the battery all the way down, it might be more like 4 hours of recharging. But there's an incredible amount of kind of flexibility in that. And what we can do with that is provide a good marriage of opportunity for electric vehicle owners to, in exchange for some, in effect, service that they are providing the grid, to receive a discount. So in exchange for the flexibility, inherent flexibility of that electric vehicle, that load can be managed either by the consumer using the technology that is on the charging equipment or on the dashboard, or rely on or allow the utility to essentially control the charging through the charging device. So through the electric vehicle supply equipment device. So all that is to say that we think this is in part about energy equity for the end users. We think that consumers in the state should be availed of the opportunity to purchase and benefit from electric vehicle infrastructure, but we also think it's important from the standpoint of the utilities that they get ahead of the challenge and recognize that they want the majority of their electric vehicle owners to manage, or allow them to essentially manage the charging equipment to some degree, all with the option to opt out if it comes to that. So that's on the electric vehicle rate design side, and I can go into more detail on what that covers.
I have a question on that.
Yes, Senator
Yeah.
Berkeley.
Oops, thank you, and thanks, Riley. My question is on the white paper that Bill sent out. It says the legislation will require. Is this something that is going to be in the T-bill, or is it a separate legislation that the administration is proposing?
This is in the, yeah, I'll defer to Michelle, but I understand it's part of the T-bill.
Okay.
Yes.
So it's going to be a requirement that all 17 of our electric distribution utilities put in place, and in essence, a kind of an optional electric vehicle rate for all consumers of a character similar essentially to the rate that is currently being offered by Green Mountain Power and Burlington Electric Department.
And it would be both for residential and commercial, so all ratepayers?
It doesn't get into that specificity. That would be likely our position and kind of advocating. This would be something that we envision being kind of the broad direction being given to the commission, and then the commission would be charged with implementing it. I think the department's position would be that this should apply broadly to commercial and residential classes. So it should cover fleet vehicles and other classes of electric vehicles.
Senator Kitchell?
Yeah, so this means, well, the same as would be for a fee, because this has to do with electric rates, and this bill will go to, in our case, Senate Finance.
So yes, I believe that sounds right to me.
Mhm.
So that's the rate design, electric vehicle rate design share of it. Part of the electric vehicle rate design also kind of overlaps with the topic of demand charges. Demand charges are a part of the rate design from our electric utilities that essentially adds an additional, it's a 1/3 of or one of three primary pieces of the electric charges. There's a customer charge, a per kilowatt hour charge, and then what they call a monthly demand charge. That monthly demand charge sets a fee for essentially the top load or kilowatt capacity that is being used to meet the loads of the customer. And those can be pretty substantial. They can account for a major share of the revenues to the utility. But on an individual customer basis, depending on the load shape, they can be kind of inordinate. They can be cause a disproportionate cost. And that's a real concern as it relates to electric vehicles, because we know the charging stations, especially the high voltage DC charging stations, are going to be kind of have a very low, fairly low utilization in the early going. But when they do have customers, there's going to be a very peaky demand. So if you have a charging station that has a 250 kilowatt demand, maybe charging a Tesla or the like, but is only utilized for a small percentage of the time over the course of a week or a month, the cost to the public charging stations can be disproportionate, and that discourages essentially their building these stations and coming in and participating. We think there are a number of pathways, kind of, or off-ramps of sorts to the demand charges. Green Mountain Power is currently has just implemented one of those pathways, but it's basically recognizing that, at least in their instance, that the peak characteristics of the charging patterns don't necessarily coincide with the cost drivers, the forward capacity market charges that they face, the bulk transmission charges that they face, and that as a result, some of the constraints that exist are inherent in the existing structure that say, if you have a load above a certain capacity or kilowatt threshold, that they're going to bump you over to a demand charge rate. They've reset that for electric vehicle charging stations and allow essentially them to stay in the rate design. In their case, it's a rate 6 that doesn't have a demand charge component. So they can essentially continue to participate more as a typical small commercial enterprise without the risk of incurring these disproportionate demand charges. And all doing this without any cross subsidy or any such thing. So I'll pause there for questions about that. But all this is in the interest of helping to move the market for the public charging station, the entry of more public charging stations, especially the fast charging stations.
Senator Perchlik.
Thank you. Riley, are you guys going to be suggesting language, or is this like just something you're going to be working on with the utilities, these demand charges, or will the T-bill have language that directing the commission or the department or the utilities to develop a new demand charge regime for?
Yeah. So the language does cover this. It refers to public charging and electric vehicle supply equipment. So it encompasses this within the ambit of the broader look at electric vehicle rates and rate design. So it's a part of the same scope, and we have wording in there that specifically calls this out, but it's perhaps it could be strengthened or made more clear, but it's in there.
Okay, and will this also include the comment that Michelle made of the possibility of charging on a little bit, adding to the rate something for the transportation infrastructure? 2 years ago, I had that bill, and we spent a lot of time talking to the department and the commission about adding a fee for the transportation infrastructure. So it sounds like there's talk about that again, at least for the public charging station. Will that be part of the same discussion on rates, or?
That's not a part of this section. That's something that's going to be studied as a separate issue. And I, at least at this point, I don't really want to commingle those issues. I want people to understand that this is kind of important in its own right, and it doesn't, squarely overlap with the revenue side of it. I think that is, a good discussion to have. It's a separate discussion in my mind, but in my mind, it's just critically important that we stay focused on the system and the consumer opportunities that are in front of us here.
I think Michelle has probably some comments on that, but okay. Any other questions at this time? Thank you very much. Great overview. Appreciate it. Thank you. Yes.
Senator Mazza, I did have one more small item, and I would concur with Riley that we're going to be, when Joe Segali comes in to talk about the road use charge, he'll also talk about the fact that we're going to be going a deeper dive into how we would operationalize an additional fee for those using public charging stations. So you'll hear about that. The one last item in our package of EV items is we are going to be, and we actually have a solicitation out there already, developing a public transportation, for public transit providers, a framework for how we would migrate from our current diesel bus framework into a framework of electrified public transit buses. We are beginning to implement some pilots around the state using public transit electric buses. And I think there's been a call from some sectors to make sure every new purchase that we do now going forward is electric, but I don't know that we're quite there yet. It's incrementally much more expensive to purchase an electric bus. We've had some issues with the pilots that we've done. The industry is still, I would say, in its early stages. So we would like to bring in technical expertise to look at how we would make a rational migration to a fully electric bus fleet, and what the time frame would be, what the cost implications would be, how our public transit providers would become ready on their maintenance side to address having an electric fleet. So we need just a much more clarified pathway. And so we're just including this as a highlight in the bill, even though we are actually moving forward with the effort, but perhaps there are thoughts from the legislature that will help inform our process.
Yes, Senator Kitchell.
Well, Michelle, you said some issues with the pilots. Could you just give us the highlights of the issue? Is it, for example, you're talking about maintenance expertise needs to be developed. Is it that? Is it cold weather? Is it, in other words, you piqued my curiosity. What are some issues?
Well, I'd have to say, in this case, Senator Chittenden might be more of an expert on this than I am, but I know
right.
that
So the witness is going to yield to our colleague from Chittenden.
Senator Chittenden, sounds like you're the center stage right now.
Nope, I yield back to Michelle. Because,
my understanding is the two large bus purchases that we did for Green Mountain Transit have had a number of mechanical type issues. So they've been off the road maybe much more frequently than we would want in terms of reliability for providing service. And I can't personally, I know Ross would know the answer to this, but I can't personally speak to what kind of mechanical issues that arose in those cases. You know, we do have smaller style buses that are going to be coming on board that we've purchased that are electric. And we're going to be deploying them in different parts of the state. I would say we're not seeing issues with cold weather start or duration type things, or with, you know, the ability of mechanics to, you know, come up to speed to do the maintenance work. I think it's just other mechanical issues that have occurred.
Senator Chittenden said, I've heard there was a problem with what?
What?
The door, the main door wasn't opening for a bit, so
Oh.
they had to call warranty service, and we're just building the infrastructure, the familiarity.
You mean you don't want to climb through the window?
The bus goes around, but you can't open the door.
Down the bus all day.
It's sort of like Hotel California, right? In this case, you can't get in rather than you can't get out. Well, maybe you can't get out either.
On the best case scenario, Michelle, when is the earliest we can see some income derived from the electric vehicles? We're giving more incentives, which is fine.
Yeah.
When do you think the first we will see some money be returned to the transportation fund from the lieu of gas tax?
You know, I would say the best case scenario might be July 1st, 2022. But I think that's probably a little optimistic in terms of getting, you know, if we get you language during the next session, you pass it, you know, we've got to operationalize the system. So more realistically, I'd say January 1st, 23 or July 1st, 23 is our earliest.
Really?
Remember
that long from now?
Well, they're only 1%, so we
Yeah,
aren't
but
losing.
we're going to incentivize them. We want that's going to grow. I mean, let's.
No, I know, but I'm just saying, even between now and that date, I bet we won't be at 15%.
Yeah, there's 4,000 vehicles on the road right now.
I know one thing: dealers are having a difficult job getting them. If they produce them, they'll sell them. There are people waiting for them, but the dealers I talk to, they have a waiting list of people who want them. So it is a growing issue, and I'm that's fine. I think that's great, but it isn't something that people are looking at a luxury now. They're looking at it as something they want to do for the environment. They want to do for their best interest. And hybrids are very popular. Hybrids, I think, are, matter of fact, there's 3 or 4 new Chevrolets just come out with hybrids, and the bigger ones now. So hybrids are maybe more popular right now than a straight electric, but that may change also.
Yeah.
Senator Mazza.
Yes, Senator Pertler.
Thank you. Michelle, does the AOT have an updated estimate on the loss of gas tax from those 3,000 vehicles?
No, we could probably put something together for you.
Okay, yeah, maybe as part of the T-bill as we talk about this, it would be helpful to know what the dollar amount is we're looking at.
Senator Mazza.
Yes, Senator Pertler.
I don't want to really get off this subject, and it is a subject, and it's probably not the proper time, but I just want to make the committee aware and AOT aware that eventually we're going to sell 14 to 17 million electric vehicles. And I hope there's some provisions being put in place what we're going to do with these batteries when they come back into they come back off of use. I mean, they're probably about the most toxic thing that we could ever invent. And I hope that we have provisions in place of what we're going to do with those batteries safely.
Maybe we could do like we do with electronics, and that's the manufacturer is responsible for the disposal. We could treat them in the same way we have with other waste or issues that where the manufacturer that is putting this out onto the market is then subsequently going to be responsible for the collection and however they're disposed of, or I don't know, to some extent, can they be reused or
Yeah,
re-engineered?
know.
So, but I would think we could look to that system and maybe have it be transferable to this particular
Coventry.
because, well, no, you don't. No, no.
I just want to get Senator Ingalls here.
I don't think so. Any
Well, they're
more
8
than we
years.
put our
They're 8
computers
years
and
and
our
longer. So
whatever.
they're 8 years and longer. Some of them have a lifetime. So, but there are going to be a time when they're going to be returned. Sure.
And I think that they're quite, that they're to dispose of them properly, I think probably is something that requires some expertise to do. So, but it's something that we really do need to think about, and it's been one of the issues. The other thing regarding the take up of EVs, and historically the argument has been, well, EVs are more expensive and therefore we're paying a higher purchase and use tax. But now as prices are coming down, that argument that the taxes paid for purchase and use, unless you decide, which people can, to purchase a high-end vehicle, but they are available now, as the chair
$40,000
indicated, for a pretty reasonable price.
$40,000 car for 25, 26 is quite a discount.
Yeah.
That's a big discount.
Yeah.
You don't get that in a gas engine car. I know not. You don't get that. That's for sure.
I don't know how much Elizabeth gets. She probably has pretty good mileage, don't you think?
Yeah, probably 60 miles per gallon. Yeah.
I don't
Probably
know.
runs on coal. I
Yeah.
noticed you had to put your coat on, Senator Kitchell. Why don't you go down and put some coal in the fire downstairs, okay?
You know, my best internet connection is in the room that is the furthest away from my heat source. And so I can tell you by the end of the day.
Got that whole coal bin full, so let's burn it
Yeah,
up.
right. Well, I have to get
Okay.
Senator Perchlik over to help me.
Any other questions this morning on this subject? Very good discussion. I sure will have a lot more to discuss in coming times. But Michelle, anything else you want to add at this point?
No, thank you for your time and the opportunity to give you this preview of what's coming.
Okay. Well, thank you for the testimony. That was great.
Thanks.
Okay, Liz, what's next? We have something at 10 or what?
Yes, we do. We have S47 walkthrough, and our legislative counsel, our fearless legislative counsel, Anthea Dexter Cooper.
Committee want to continue on or take a 5-minute break? Yes, Senator Ingalls.
I'd take a 5-minute break, but
Okay.
it's up to everybody else.
Let's take a 5-minute break, okay? Thank you.
Okay.
We back on?
We are almost.
Okay.
We're on Zoom Live right now.
All right. We're all set to rock and roll. Okay. What do we have next, Liz?
Anthea's up for S47 walkthrough.
Okay. Anthea, good morning.
Morning. So for the record, Anthea Dexter Cooper from the Office of Legislative Counsel, and I am on your agenda today to do a walkthrough of S47, which was introduced by Senator Perchlik and others. I don't know if Senator Perchlik wanted to say something before I jumped into the walkthrough, or if he wanted me to just
Why don't you
begin.
give us an overview, Senator Perchlik?
Yeah, thank you. This bill language is the language that we ended up with at the end of our discussions on this topic. This is the topic about direct-to-consumer manufacturers being able to open a service center in the state. And, we went around a lot with the Vermont Automobile Dealers Association and the manufacturers and others, and we end up with some language that we thought was kind of getting down to the very nub of the issue, and that was just the part of the statute that says a manufacturer can open a service center. So we had language that Anthea came up with that said they can, as one of the, because there's already another exemption. So we added a second exemption for those manufacturers that have never had nor have now a franchise and are only selling electric cars. So that language didn't pass, obviously, and because we did the study instead. So we just basically, I introduced the bill on the language where we had ended up after we saw the study, because the study didn't identify any problems with doing so. So that's basically what it is. I don't know if you want, I could go on for a long time about it, but I figure we'll have discussions after we hear the walkthrough and the testimony.
Okay. Go
I
ahead.
got a question.
Yes, Senator Ingalls.
And Senator Perchlik, so the problem is before me, and I apologize for asking for just a little bit of more historical information on it, it was just a problem of these electric manufacturers being able to do business in the state to service a product that they have sold in the state but didn't have a franchise agreement. Is that where we're at with that?
Yeah, basically they're selling cars in the state by considering it an out-of-state sale, because it's an online sale and the cars are brought in to the state. So we have people that are buying them, but they're not allowed, now that there are enough people, I think there's over 700 Teslas, for example, for one company, but other companies that sell electric cars are preparing to do the same model or taking deposits. And as soon as you get enough customers, then it makes sense to open a service center, but they can't. So that's kind of why it didn't come up originally, but came up after a couple of years of them selling cars, if that answers your question.
Why can't they open up a service center?
Because the statute says a manufacturer cannot open a service center, which makes sense to protect the franchise dealers from their manufacturer. We don't want Ford to open a service center next to Walker Ford Motors to undercut them. So it makes sense why we have it in the statute. It's what I consider is this updating the statute for the fact that we now have manufacturers that sell directly to consumers, but to protect the current dealers and franchisees, we want to limit it to only those that don't have franchises or ever had them and only sell electric cars.
So you want to have, you are in favor of opening up the service centers for people that don't have the franchises here, but just want to open service centers to service their customers?
If they only sell electric cars and if they never had nor have franchisees in the state that they'd be undercutting.
But they won't have to go through any of what the dealers go through now then.
They have said in testimony last year, and I think we'll say again this year, that they're more than happy to do all the dealership regulation. They will fall under the statute for a dealer so that they will follow all the consumer protection laws. Everything that we have a dealer do, they would do if we allow them to come into the state, open a service center, which has a good economic development.
I just want level playing field for all the dealers. They all have to follow the same rules and regulations because dealers have invested a lot of money into their dealerships, and I don't want someone from the outside having an advantage without following the same rules and regulations for overhead that they have to maintain. That's all I've ever been interested in. I think it's, yes, Senator Kitchell.
Well, I'm just trying to sort this out because for the manufacturers that sell direct to consumers and don't have, the bricks and mortar
Right.
dealership, then you can't, they're a whole different model than a franchise dealership, because GM or Ford or Subaru actually, in order to sell their vehicles, they prescribe the facade, they prescribe so many of the conditions of
right.
having that franchise. So those franchise rules relative to those manufacturers that work through a dealer presence is totally, I don't even know how you could begin to apply them in the same way, because they just simply don't exist under this direct to consumer sales arrangement. So when we talk about leveling the playing field, a lot of what a franchise arrangement requires just doesn't apply here. That's
Well, that's a
the
good
only
point.
thing that.
Good point, because I know one dealer had to put almost $1 million into his facility to meet the standards of General Motors.
Right.
They had to change the floor, the ceiling, the walls, the lights, the whole thing.
But because this is a different manufacturer to sales arrangement, then all those prescriptive requirements that a manufacturer is placing on a franchise, on their dealerships, don't have to do it.
Right, but all the state laws would apply. So the fact that there's a contract agreement between a manufacturer and a franchisee is a different issue. That's a contract issue that we don't, get involved with in the statutes. But these manufacturers would have their own requirements for their own stores. I mean, that's the only difference, is that one's a franchise and one isn't. And we did hear testimony, people said, well, we just have to make them become franchise business models, which is just not going to happen. They're not going to change their entire business model because of Vermont. And if we just say, well, then tough, you can't do business in Vermont, we're losing out on the economic development model. Economic development benefits, we're losing out on the advancement for electric vehicles, and we're losing out on that consumer protection of those customers. One, because they can't service the vehicles here, but two, they can't buy them here. We're forcing them to be out-of-state sales, which just doesn't make sense to me why we want to do that.
Could General Motors or Ford use that same model and switch over to direct sales?
I do not think so, and we can get testimony from that.
No, because there's that previous, that very narrow language saying that previously we're doing business in the state. So I think it would preclude
All right,
would close off that avenue.
Let's go through and see what it has.
And one more, just want to
Yeah,
add.
Go ahead.
To protect these franchisees, I was in the car business when they weren't worried much about Vermont, especially GM. I went down and testified about the franchise laws in the state, and and the protections we were looking for from the state. And GM just simply said, "Well, the heck with it, we'll just go bankrupt and get rid of all of you." And that's what they did. And they did it on their whim. I was running a rather large franchise at that time, and GM just said, "We have too many of you, and we're going to get rid of you." And that's what they did. So I'm more about the consumer of Vermont than I am protecting these franchises, to be honest with you.
If I could say one thing.
Yes, Senator Chittenden.
I'm of the same mind as Senator Ingalls. To me, what you're pitching here is the ability to allow Tesla to service Teslas in Vermont while conforming to all of the same rules to be a dealership in the state. So that seems to be reasonable, and I like how it opens a pathway for more electric vehicles in the state.
I just want to clarify that the goal is not for that one company, even though
Right.
people refer to that company. This really is there might be others. So I don't want to say that we're doing something for a specific company that Rivian or others might have the same model, and we want to be fair to them as well.
Okay, well, let's hear more about it. Thank you. Anthea?
Okay, so I'm going to put up on the screen S47. So hopefully you can all see that. It is a 2-page bill. I also had Liz post just an excerpt that has some of the definitions that are referenced throughout the bill, and I'll refer to them during my walkthrough and switch over to that screen. So all you have for me are 2 documents, and they're each 2 pages, so much shorter than usual. So as Senator Perchlik introduced the issue, this is going to be an amendment to the Motor Vehicle Manufacturers, Distributors, and Dealers Franchising Practices Act, which is in Title 9, Chapter 108. And the vast majority, in fact, I think almost all of that chapter deals with the relationship between dealers and manufacturers, where the dealer is a franchisee of the manufacturer. And as we've mentioned, this new business model, the direct-to-consumer sale, doesn't really fit in the traditional, you have a manufacturer and you have dealers on the ground that are doing the work of selling the vehicles. It's almost like in this new business model, the direct-to-consumer manufacturer is both the dealer and the manufacturer all at once. So remember that as we're walking through this. So under the current law, it says that it is unlawful for a franchisor, manufacturer, factory branch, distributor, et cetera, to own, operate, or control, either directly or indirectly, a motor vehicle warranty or service facility located in the state, except, and then there are 2 exemptions. So first, I think it's important for us to look at the definition of manufacturer in the context of the Motor Vehicle Manufacturers, Distributors, and Dealers Franchising Practices Act. So the definition of manufacturer that you're dealing with, and this is the second bullet point on this handout, is any person, resident or non-resident, who manufactures or assembles new motor vehicles. So that's the crux of the definition. This is going to cover direct-to-consumer manufacturers, not dealing with companies like Carvana or Vroom that are doing more of a clearinghouse. So this is just the direct-to-consumer manufacturer that's going to fall under the definition of manufacturer. So that's who this prohibition applies to in current law. Looking at the exemptions. So currently there's an exemption where that manufacturer could open a warranty or service center on an emergency or interim basis. Or, and the second exception is if no qualified applicant has applied for appointment as a dealer in a market previously served by a new motor vehicle dealer. And for purposes of the direct-to-consumer manufacturer, they do not fall under this exemption because Vermont is not a market previously served by a new motor vehicle dealer, because given the relationship of the direct-to-consumer manufacturer, they don't use dealers. And let's look at the definition of new motor vehicle dealer. For purposes of Title 9, Chapter 108, a new motor vehicle dealer is any person engaged in the business of selling, offering to sell, soliciting, or advertising the sale of new motor vehicles, and this is the important part, who holds or held at the time a cause of action under this chapter, because we're dealing with the relationship between dealers and manufacturers, a valid sales and service agreement, franchise, or contract granted by the manufacturer. And because direct-to-consumer manufacturers are not entering into agreements with dealers because they don't have dealers, there is no new motor vehicle dealer that ever could have been servicing Vermont for purposes of this exemption. So that is what the law currently says. And that is why direct-to-consumers cannot open a warranty or service center in Vermont. So what this bill would do is add a third exemption, and that would apply if the manufacturer, so your direct-to-consumer manufacturer, exclusively manufactures or assembles zero emissions vehicles. And Vermont statutes do not currently define what a zero emissions vehicle is. We have a definition for plug-in electric vehicle, which would be a subset of zero emissions vehicle, but an easy way to think of it, and I pulled this from the multi-state ZEV action plan, of which Vermont is a participant, and they have some very easy definitions. So a zero emission vehicle is going to include battery electric vehicles, fuel cell electric vehicles, those are fueled by hydrogen, and plug-in hybrid electric vehicles. So the PEV that we do define as a subset of the ZEV, and we certainly could add to statute a definition of ZEV if that was something the committee or body was interested in doing. But this is the universe of manufacturers you're dealing with. They're going to be making PHEVs, the plug-in hybrid electric vehicle, the all-electric battery electric vehicles, or the fuel cell electric vehicles. And I do not believe those are available in Vermont yet. So that's the first prong that they need to meet. The second prong that they need to meet is that they're a dealer registered pursuant to 23 VSA Chapter 7, Subchapter 4. So now we're dealing with Title 23, where you spend more of your time. This is where there are the state requirements on dealerships. So in Chapter 108 and Title 9, that's really regulating the relationship between the dealer and the manufacturer. What 23 VSA Chapter 7, Subchapter 4 is doing is it's regulating on a state level what dealers need to do. So that's where they're having the requirements for plates and how the plates can be used by dealers. It's where you're getting the state requirements for purposes of how much square footage there needs to be and how many days out of the year the dealership needs to be open. That's not to say in the more traditional model that the manufacturer is not going to require something more of its dealers through that franchise agreement, but this language would require the dealer, the direct sale manufacturer in this case, to be falling under the state requirements. The third requirement to meet this exemption is that the direct-to-consumer manufacturer needs to directly own the motor vehicle warranty or service facility. The fourth requirement is that it's operating a dealership that meets certain requirements, and I'll show you what those requirements are, at the same location as the motor vehicle warranty or service facility. So the scenario that this could be addressing is the direct-to-consumer, say, wants to open a warranty or service center in every county throughout the state, but they only want to have a dealership in University Mall in South Burlington. This would require that direct-to-consumer manufacturer to have a dealership location that meets state requirements in every location that it's going to have a warranty or service facility center. So I'm going to pull up language that'll show you what 450A, subdivision A4, and subsection C says. And those are that the dealership needs to own real estate as his or her place of business or have a lease with a far enough out expiration date. It includes a building of at least 1,200 square feet in size, used primarily for the business of the dealership, and it needs to have adequate facilities for the maintenance of records that are required by law to be kept, so that an enforcement officer could go to the dealership to get information that they're required to maintain in records. And this is in addition to the direct-to-consumer manufacturer needing to maintain all those records in the state as other dealerships are required to do under state law. And then the other requirement for each location that there would be a warranty and service center is that the dealership needs to be open for business at least 146 days during the calendar year, and that dealer needs to apply the commissioner with the hours of operation of the business that the dealership will be maintaining during the registration period. So while everything that I have in this handout that's hyperlinked, those are all the requirements for dealers on a state level in Title 23, well, all of those will apply. We're specifically in this amendment calling out these two requirements for purposes of every single location that there would be a warranty or service center. And then the last requirement for this manufacturer to open a warranty or service center under this exemption is that the manufacturer does not currently have or had not previously had a valid sales and service agreement, franchise, or contract with a new motor vehicle dealer as defined under Title IX. And the reason why we're specifically calling out the definition here is because there really is this distinction between what is a dealer under Title 23 and what is a new motor vehicle dealer under Title IX. And the thing that makes you a dealer, a new motor vehicle dealer in Title IX, as we saw in that first definition, is having that sales and service agreement, franchise, or contract with a manufacturer, which in the case of the direct-to-consumer manufacturer is not possible given their business model. So just to go over the requirements to fall under the new exemption, you would need to be manufacturing ZEVs. You would need to be a dealer that's following the state rules on dealerships. You need to directly own the motor vehicle warranty or service facility. You need to actually have a dealership with those sort of physical presence requirements under Title 23 in every location. And you cannot have previously had or currently have any new motor vehicle dealers that you have an agreement with, because that's not part of their business model. And then the last section is the effective date, and it would go into effect on passage. This would just be on passage, opening the door for the direct-to-consumer manufacturers to be able to start the process of opening a warranty or service center and going through the process of being registered as a dealer. So it's probably not like if this bill was signed on May 1st that there would be a warranty service center on May 2nd. I think there would be some ramp up time, but you certainly could push out the effective date to July 1st or to a point, into 2022 if you wanted to have it be in January to sort of have a time certain where this wouldn't be happening before, but probably the groundwork would be getting laid by the direct-to-consumer manufacturers in advance of that effective date.
Okay, questions? Do we have someone here from the Auto Dealers Association this morning?
I think they're all lined up for tomorrow. I think today
Okay,
the one witness couldn't
All
come tomorrow.
who else wants to be heard on this? All your co-sponsors want to be heard?
I don't think so. But we do have Paul Zabriskie from Capstone who was going to testify on this today because he couldn't be here tomorrow.
Okay. All right, want to move? Yes, Senator Ingalls.
Senator Perchlik, are you aware of any of these companies that would follow all those guidelines that have made requests to be wanting to be in service in Vermont and haven't been able to because of the restrictions?
Yes, and tomorrow we have on the schedule to hear from Tesla, and I don't know if they're going to represent. I know they talk to the other direct sale manufacturers of electric vehicles, so they might be able to represent what others are thinking. But Tesla in particular has said last year that if this was to change, they would open a service center in Vermont. But there's enough owners here, and they've expanded that they want to open a service center in Vermont. I can't promise it'll be in your district, though.
We saw one once.
Okay, next. Anthea, anything else? Okay, so we're going to move on. Who's the next? You had someone else in the waiting room?
Yeah, Paul Zabriskie from Capstone.
Okay. Paul, you were there with us this morning?
I am. Good morning.
Okay, good morning.
For the record, Paul Zabriskie, Capstone Community Action. My role is Director of Weatherization and Climate Impact Programs. I first of all want to be clear that I'm not an expert in this field, but I have two interests that I think are relevant to this bill, and so I'll share them. One is that I operate for Capstone or manage the Mileage Smart program, which is an incentive provided on.
Would you tell us something about Capstone for the new members, maybe? Yeah.
Sure. Capstone Community Action is one of 5 community action agencies in the state. We serve people who are vulnerable, people in poverty, we assist people to climb out of poverty. So we provide emergency services in terms of, if you need food, if you need housing, if you need fuel for heat, community action is your landing spot. Capstone also operates Head Start in central Vermont. We serve Washington, Orange, Lamoille counties and several communities in Windsor and 1 or 2 in Rutland, 1 or 2 in Addison. The So Community Action is a social service organization, a nonprofit. Our peer agencies are CVOEO in Chittenden County, Evka in the southeast corner, Brock Community Action of Bennington and Rutland County, and NECA up in the Northeast Kingdom. Capstone operates this program that we launched last year. It had a rough start due to COVID, called Mileage Smart, where we provide an incentive for high efficiency vehicles, better than 40 miles per gallon, to income qualified Vermonters. And I'd be happy to come back someday and fill you in on where that program is at and how it's progressed. But thus far, a third of the people who have accessed vehicles in that program have chosen EVs. And that's really where we want to go. We want to help the community of folks who are not in the new car market to participate in the transition towards a clean energy future. And an important way to do that is to introduce electric vehicles to the folks who aren't buying new vehicles in Vermont. And, in first 6 months of 2020, 8 in 10 electric vehicles sold in the United States were Teslas. So as we're trying to encourage used car ownership, there's a brand that is completely unavailable to the consumers we're serving. And it is the most prolific brand of electric vehicles out there. So, so we have an interest in increasing the number of used electric vehicles that are available in the marketplace in Vermont. And we think this bill would help that. One of our criteria within our program, buying used cars and working with Vermonters, is that the seller has to be a dealer registered in the state of Vermont with a brick and mortar presence here. The goal there is just to limit the shenanigans that can go on in private sales, and we're using public funds. We have put fairly clear brackets around how those deals can transpire. So there's limitations there. I'm going to shift gears to another project I've been working on last year that's kind of out there. But many of you know the executive director of Capstone Community Action. Her name is Sue Minter. She's a former legislator, sat on House Transportation Committee, sat in House Appropriations, working with the transportation budget. Later, she was the Secretary of Transportation at VTrans. So Sue has brought an understanding of the transportation ecosystem to community action that is really second to none. As we look at the challenges of helping people deal with life in poverty as well as manage to get out of poverty, transportation is a gigantic barrier. And about 18 months ago, we put together a program and have been working on a business plan for a fleet of electric vehicles that were utilized in a car share program that also enabled what would be sort of the equivalent of Uber in rural areas. We call it Ruber. It is car sharing, ride hailing, van pooling, utilizing an electric fleet. And it's really targeted at helping people who lack access to mobility, and for households with 2 cars that might be able to get away with 1 car if they had access to a second car on an as-needed basis. So we're looking and researching fleet management in rural environments, which is a unique challenge, to say the least. When I initiated the process of sort of what is the hardware that we're looking for that can service this, I quickly learned that the hardware isn't nearly as important as the software. And how do you manage a fleet of electric vehicles within the context of a rural environment, multiple drivers who are non-employees? And where my research led me is that what makes a Tesla, I'll start with them, unique is it's really a software platform that a car was built around, as opposed to many of the other vehicles that are on the market as EVs, which are really a car manufacturer had a car and they tried to figure out how to put software in and make it electric. And there's a couple of features that I'll just highlight that are interesting to a fleet manager around a Tesla. One is a capability to save the last 10 minutes from every camera in the car, and there's many. You can imagine that as we have multiple members of this cooperative who are driving electric vehicles, in the case of an accident, to have saved the last 10 minutes from every camera, where you eliminate numerous questions about who's at fault. You don't have to take people's word. You have visual evidence looking in all directions. You have knowledge of what the driver's behavior was for 10 minutes prior. So if there's any sort of impairment or poor behavior, you enable your insurance company to have access to information that can help you as a fleet operator limit your risk. And the recipe for fleet operations in this thing, in this project, is insurance and depreciation. Those are the two factors that drive the economics of it. Insurance is a gigantic one. So having a feature in a vehicle that can help establish the liability issues when you have multiple drivers is a big deal. It hasn't really flowed through the industry in a mature way by any stretch. But anyway, we think it's very important. The other items, the software, because these vehicles sort of talk to the mothership, the fleet administrator can control the drive mode. So there are numerous drive modes, and you've seen this in lots of cars where they have a performance mode and an economy mode, and standard mode would be sort of not unusual. The fleet manager can actually control that so that the driver would need a PIN code in order to override it. That in a Tesla, it's called chill mode, but it prevents somebody from flooring it when the light turns green. And the implications, aside from just driver behavior and mayhem on the roads, is it allows the fleet manager to control the range of the vehicle. And range is another huge issue. When you have plug-in vehicles that you're using as a fleet, and they're going here, there, and everywhere, how far they can go in a day really matters. And for the fleet manager to be able to control the behavior of the driver to extend the fleet's range is a big deal. So, I would say that the other third factor is a great safety performance, and that a fleet manager has what's called a duty of care responsibility to put people in a safe vehicle. And the performance of these vehicles has been outstanding in that realm as well. Another piece of this project that came up with COVID, working with the food bank, Capstone, like many community action agencies, offers a food pantry where folks who are hungry can get what they need to take care of themselves and their families. What we've seen is a nearly doubling in the demands for food insecurity, but actual traffic to our facilities is almost half of what it used to be. And that's because people are afraid to leave their houses. Many of the people that we deal with are really vulnerable and they are not going out. So many parts of the state, we've instituted food delivery. So as we're driving every freaking back road in the state, we're looking at what's the most efficient way to do that. Well, when you go and look at electric vans, there aren't many that have landed in the consumer marketplace, but most of the ones that are headed that way also use this manufacturer direct model. And part of that, I think, is the Amazon is one of the firms, Rivian is another firm. So it appears to us that much of the innovation that is important to our model is occurring through organizations that have this sort of manufacturer direct to consumer business model. And for Capstone, we're not going to debt our case ourselves. We're not going to put a fleet of vehicles on the ground that don't have service in the state, right? It's just not, it ain't happening. So from my perspective, this is an important bill because it opens the door to a whole range of technologies that allow us to develop an innovative model for mobility that can assist folks in need and make Vermonters' dollars go farther at the family level. And with that, I'll stop talking, and I'd love to any questions you have.
Senator Chittenden.
So thank you, Paul. I got to say, when you were starting out, you seemed to mention Tesla a few times, and I was cautioning you that seems like Senator Perchlik doesn't want this to be the Tesla bill. So I appreciate your end of your remarks, which really opened the door, focusing on other business models and emerging vehicles that we're going to see that we already saw a little bit from the Agency of Transportation. So I appreciate that you're seeing this as a way to open up a lot of innovation in the state with lower emission vehicles. So thank you for that testimony.
Senator Perchlik.
Yeah, thank you. And one of the reasons Paul mentioned to me this some time ago that somebody's looking at doing a fleet would definitely want to have as an option one of these direct to sale manufacturers, whether it to be an electric van or a passenger vehicle. But then I also heard it from others about, any fleet manager would definitely want to have the service centers in the state. And I think if we want to, it's why I wanted to have Paul come testify, because it's not just about what kind of car I can buy, but it's about these other, there are more issues involved here than just, can somebody get their Tesla fixed? So that's why I wanted to have Paul bring up these other issues and the future that we're looking at with these electric vans from other direct to sale manufacturers.
Questions?
Yeah, Senator Perchlik.
Yes, go right ahead.
Senator Perchlik, with these companies that want to come in and they want to open up their abilities to service their fleets on the products that they've sold, would you have language in there that that's the only product that they can serve, that they can't go to service a Chevy Bolt or a Ford Edge or anything like that? The only product they can serve are the ones that they sell?
That would be okay with me. I mean, they wouldn't be able to provide warranty service for none of those vehicles, I'm assuming they don't want to fix people's old Subarus, but if that would help get the bill passed, I don't see a problem with that.
Any further questions, comments? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you. Okay, Liz, what's our next item?
Next item is we're going to be going back to the truck permit issue with Kevin Marcia and Joe Segal of AOT, and Joe
Okay.
Flynn will be on the call. That's
Great.
scheduled for 11. So that's about 15 minutes away.
Okay. I guess we'll have to have a break until 11 o'clock.
Okay.
All right,
I'm gonna stop the stream and start it back up at
Okay.
11.
11 o'clock.